and welcome to the iModernize podcast, technology news, views, and insights for today's businesses. I'm your host, Amanda Blackburn, Director of Marketing at Profound Logic Software. Today, we're discussing the OpenJS Foundation, the neutral home to grow and sustain the JavaScript and web ecosystem with over 30 projects that include Node.js, Electron, AMP, and jQuery. I'm excited to be joined by Robin Ginn, the Executive Director of the OpenJS Foundation, and Joe Sepi, who is an open source engineer and advocate at IBM. Robin just passed her one-year anniversary leading the organization and previously led major initiatives at Microsoft to advance open source technologies, community development, and open standards. Joe has been active in the Node.js project community and the foundation for a number of years and was part of the small group that worked to merge the JS Foundation and Node.js Foundation. He's now the chairperson of the Cross Project Council, the OpenJS Foundation's top technical and advisory committee. Welcome to you both. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Amanda. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda.
So just to jump right in, Robin, can you tell us more about the history of the OpenJS Foundation and what it offers its members?
Yeah, so I had been a part of the Node.js Foundation since it started, almost 11 years ago. And as you mentioned in your intro, the Node.js Foundation merged with the JS, which was the JavaScript Foundation, to create a new home. And I like to say we're new, but many of us who are participating have really been around for a long time. And we have lots of new friends who are joining. And what we do is really offer a neutral place for technology, open source technology development and collaboration to happen. And having that neutral place we think is really important. So if you're a company and you're taking a big bet on a piece of open source software, you want to know that that's being developed in a kind of a fair and open and kind of a clear and transparent way. And we're actually super excited that Profound Logic is one of the members of the OpenJS Foundation.
That's right.
Super cool. And really, that really helps us develop those programs, whether it's training and certification, supporting the projects and giving a place to convene, providing some of the IP support as projects develop. So. And really, we just hope that you benefit all by just having greater connections and collaboration with the community and taking advantage of some marketing and sort of thought leadership opportunities as your important contributors in the open source space.
Yeah, definitely. And we've enjoyed being a part of that because it's such a vibrant community, especially on the Node side from our experience. And it's, nice to be able to go out and see people so passionate about, a language and a technology and to see what they've been able to accomplish with it. And Joe, I was actually going to ask you, so you've been involved with the community side of things. Can you give us a little bit more information about what that's been like to build this community for the OpenJS Foundation?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as you mentioned, the Node community is really passionate. That's a really good word for it. And not only for the platform and the technology, but also the community and frankly the governance of the project. But I have been a part of the Node.js Community Committee for a number of years, which focuses on aspects outside of the core technical platform development and a lot of obviously community focused stuff. And we've taken a lot of that to the OpenJS Foundation and are just working hard on building out a great community. We have been making a lot of progress on an individual supporter program and generally just trying to engage with the community more.
Yeah, like I said, it's been very impressive to see the level of commitment and involvement in the community. And that's something that, we enjoy sharing with businesses that we talk to, just to let them know that this is active and there's always, new ideas, new ways to support businesses on these languages and technologies. And, that was going to be my next question is, today's businesses have more tech options than ever before, but also as many tech challenges. And so that's a question I would ask you both is, why is open source important to today's businesses?
If you think about, let's just look at Node.js and why it's important. I think we were having hackathons probably 12 or 13 years ago. And really, I love to credit the foundation model for really helping kind of keep Node.js sort of modern and trustworthy for businesses today. You mentioned, I think we talked about Netflix. NASA is using Node.js in spacesuit solutions as their astronauts, spend time on the space station. So it's like an essential part. And I think we know that most companies are using open source. But interestingly, the Linux Foundation, of which we're a part of, just released a white paper last week that talked about the importance of open source software to businesses, and particularly vertical businesses. And they said, yes, while a lot of businesses are using open source, they found that as businesses contribute to open source, as they move to that digital transformation, modernization, that actually helps them innovate much more quickly, and having actually, from a recent McKinsey report, innovate 3 times faster. So some real data coming out measuring that impact.
That's great. And we'll make those studies available in the description of this podcast. So if you're interested, listeners, you can go follow that up. But yeah, definitely for I know for our customers, because we are in the legacy modernization space, we're definitely, trying to get across that message that open source, including Node.js, can be a really fantastic way to help them address some of those challenges. Joe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just pulled up the GitHub repository for Node, and there are over 2,800 contributors. So, I don't want to say that that's like free work, because obviously, we should all be giving back and supporting open source. But that seems like a good, way to look at it is you're getting all of these people working on the platform who are focused on making it, stable, secure, continuing to stay modern, and it's the security and everything. So it's like having a whole other team supporting the work that you're doing and the products that you're building.
What I love with that, what happens on GitHub, it's just that feedback loop is just instant, right? And it's open to all. So as you're building your own software, solutions, you have access to that developer feedback, the documentation that those 2,800 developers are all working on in real time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And, that's something that we've actually even taken advantage of for our own projects and our own products is, and just to, clarify for any listeners who aren't familiar, Node Package Manager, or NPM is a great way to discover those applications, the code that people are writing, and be able to repurpose that, in any number of ways, but even for, business technologies and business applications. And one of the things, and maybe Joe, you could respond to this, is, something that we've noticed in the AS400 market is a lot of our developers are getting older, and that's just a fact of life. Soon they're going to be retiring, and a lot of businesses that we work with are still running applications on RPGLE, or older application languages that maybe aren't as well documented, and they're going to lose that mind share when that developer leaves. How can Node or other open source languages help bridge that gap, and especially when they're looking for newer developers?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think there's been a better time to be looking at utilizing open source technologies to modernize these sorts of legacy applications. Like you were saying, NPM is a huge resource of packages, and there's no point in reinventing the wheel. And in my experience, moving from legacy applications to more modern approaches like microservices, for example, what's great about that is you can do it in a piecemeal sort of fashion. Take certain applications, start to think about things in sort of isolation, and be able to abstract out aspects of your application so that you can modernize them, you can maintain and update those without affecting the larger application. And the more that you can kind of separate those sorts of things, the better moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. And Robin, for you, this might be something that you see as well, is, one of the biggest challenges to, I think, all businesses, not just businesses running on legacy systems, is just the accumulation of technical debt, and how to try to address that. And I'd go so far as to say that most businesses are dealing with some kind of technical debt. Could you speak a little bit to how open languages, Node.js might be able to help with that?
Yeah, I think if you look at a combination of open source and open standards, and the two are very well intertwined, and open source are driving standards today, what you're really doing is driving that interoperability. So you can have sort of the, you can ease your transition to the cloud without having to rip and replace absolutely everything, and that that your systems will work better together. I think Node.js and other open source technologies just give you that sort of that flexibility to build modern apps and new solutions. You also mentioned, I thought was pretty interesting, just about the ability to sort of attract new talent and developers.
Yeah.
Before lockdown, I was at a developer conference recently, and I talked to some recruiters in the booths, and they said absolutely they're hiring, kind of probably one of the top categories they're hiring for Node.js developers. So it definitely is kind of the top of the developer talent pool today.
Yeah, definitely. We see, especially because languages like RPG or even COBOL aren't being taught in colleges anymore, even though, a huge portion of the world's businesses have that in their infrastructure in one way or another. So Node is really a great language for that, because it's both client and server side, and businesses can look for, even JavaScript developers who could very easily learn Node and leverage that for their business applications.
Yeah, I've been doing JavaScript for 20 years, and I think that with the with Node being created in 2009, it really just made JavaScript such a prevalent technology in the space, and to be able to hire engineers that can work on both the front end and the back end, I think has been really a great asset for the companies that I've been involved in.
Yeah, that's great to hear. We're seeing the same. So speaking of successfulness, and you had kind of mentioned this a bit before, Robin, with the NASA story, which that is actually really cool, that like astronauts are having to trust Node to keep them safe in space. That's pretty amazing. But I was just curious if you could share any other, success stories that come to mind about businesses using Node.
Oh gosh, I think we like to say Node is everywhere, and it really truly is once you start
Yeah.
to talk to companies. And again, I think we've been actually running some case studies on our blog. If you're interested, we posted one just recently on how Netflix is using Node.js. We have companies like Esri, who are doing some COVID tracking, as well as Nearform. Just some really fascinating use cases. But again, when you talk mission critical, making sure your spacesuit doesn't leak when you're in space is as critical as it comes.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and actually, it was really interesting. We had written up this really cool case study, so we invited a NASA astronaut who benefited from that technology to come speak at our conference last year. Her name's Christina Koch. She spent a year on the space station, so she spoke at our conference this year, OpenJS World, So you might want to check her out. I think she has a really fascinating story to tell about how NASA is using technologies and web technologies as well.
Yeah, that was a really great talk. I really enjoyed that. And I'll also mention too, I'm pretty sure on the OpenJS blog, there's a success story around the weather company as well,
Yeah.
which is one I was going to mention. They have, billions of locations and 60 languages and 230 locales and, just a huge application as well.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And I would say that kind of shows Node's scalability as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and you had mentioned one phrase that JavaScript and Node.js is everywhere. Another phrase that we often hear and use is always bet on Node. And before joining IBM, I worked at a couple other big name companies, and at both of them, we were doing one was a rewrite and one was a greenfield application, and we were saying we should do it on Node, the core technical team working on the product. And since we had so many PHP developers, they decided to build those in PHP. And in both instances, within a couple of years, they were rewriting it in Node. So always bet on Node.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, we see that. We see that as well. We run into several examples of companies who decide that, Robin, you had mentioned rip and replace. That's always an option that we are very opposed to because we've had enough experience to know that they may think that that's the fastest, easiest way or the most thorough way, but it just turns into a huge mess and very expensive and risky. And the other one is rewriting, and we run into companies that are trying to rewrite into .NET or Java, and they kind of run into similar situations. There are limitations there, whereas with Node, there really is that kind of flexibility and as well as stability, but flexibility and portability that businesses can take advantage of, and utilize that technology to help them do things like connect to the cloud, and implement new technologies like AI. And again, with npm, you can just plug that right into your application, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think Node.js is great if you have, it works in all the clouds. So if you have a multi-cloud or a single cloud strategy, it's going to work for you. So
Yeah,
It's also,
definitely.
if I'm not mistaken, it's the most utilized platform in everyone's cloud as well. And I think the other thing too that's great about Node is, it's great to use, at the core of your application. But if you have something that's like resource intense or needs something that is a little bit outside of Node's wheelhouse, you can spin out a worker thread or send that off to another service. But keeping Node at your core has been a really great option.
Yeah, so you guys have touched on a little bit about my next question, which is, let's say that, someone's listening to this podcast today. They were on the fence about Node. Now they're not. They're ready to start, implementing Node for their business applications or their business systems. What advice or best practices would you give those businesses who are considering leveraging Node for their enterprise applications?
I mean, I think one thing to keep in mind, and one thing to perhaps have in mind at the outset, is to be very cloud native focused, cloud ready focused with your Node.js developments, and think about how developing your Node application will be integrating with Kubernetes and being able to surface your metrics and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's and just to kind of give a little bit of structure to that too, we um, most of our solutions at this point at Profound are based in Node, and doing things like offering options for systems integration, API, portability to the cloud or a hybrid cloud scenario, as well as modernizing legacy code. We found that Node is very flexible for for all of these different types of projects.
Hmm. Yeah, and I would also defer back to the previous point too about thinking about getting away from these monolith applications and more microservice oriented architectures is a good way to look at things too.
Okay.
And of course, serverless is a great option if that's the right use case, some sort of event-driven architecture. It's very cost efficient and versatile as well.
Gotcha. That all sounds like really good advice. I know that businesses have a lot to think about when it comes to their technology, and I believe, just based on what we've heard here today, that Node is definitely Node and all other open source languages are mature enough, stable enough, secure enough, and flexible enough to help businesses of all kinds and sizes accomplish the goals that they're trying to set for themselves. Excellent.
Yeah, and you can see too the development in Node, in open source, in the repository and in the issues and the pull requests and really kind of track the direction that things are going and such as well.
Yep, definitely. So I have one last question for you guys. How are you staying sane through quarantine? And have you developed any new hobbies or activities to help you do that?
I was going to say I'm staying sane by relying on old hobbies. I'm a musician, and I've just been doing a lot of music stuff and doing some socially distanced and responsible band rehearsals, and just working on a new record and something I'm pretty excited about.
That's really cool. Well, my big thing is the exercise. That's always been my number one thing. So I'm still keeping up. So that's always fun. And old hobbies, I actually just bought a guitar, have not played since I was a kid. So my son is giving me guitar lessons.
Oh, nice.
That's
Starting
amazing.
next week. Yeah. So
Maybe you and Joe can get together and collaborate on some musical projects.
we'll start
I'm
jamming.
into it. Yep, I'm
We'll be
into it.
jamming on our weekly calls.
Well, I definitely feel like, if there's a silver lining to the quarantine at all, it's definitely challenging the way that we spend our time and even work. And, and technology plays a part of that as well. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting time, but that's really cool that you guys have that in common with each other. So,
Yeah.
Mm,
And
yeah.
how about you, Amanda? What have you been doing
um,
for?
So I have actually gotten into YouTubing, becoming a YouTuber and creating videos on different topics that are my passions, which is some really nerdy things like science fiction and video games. So
Cool.
that's been fun.
Super cool.
Yeah, because it's like a really fun hobby, and you get to interact with people who are also interested in the same topics. So yeah.
That's great.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to be here today. And, it was really great to get a chance to talk to you both and learn more about the foundation and all that it has to offer.
Great. Well,
Thank,
thanks, Amanda, and thanks the Profound Logic team for hosting us.
yeah, thank you
Absolutely.
so much. It's great to be here.
Oh, awesome. And I wanted to encourage everyone who's listening to visit openjsf.org to take advantage of all the foundation has to offer. And that includes open source training and certification, collaboration and interacting with that community that we've talked about in this podcast, and learning more about the foundation's projects and how to, become a part of that. So to everyone listening, thanks for taking the time to join us, and we'll talk to you next time.